Good morning, wonderful people of fourth period. Okay, so here is your poetry analysis example video. We are going to be looking at the poem, Prayer to the Pacific by Leslie Marmon Silko. This is on page 347 in your Springboard book, so if you need a minute to get that out and get that set up, please go right ahead. I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about the process we're going to take when we go to analyze a poem. And this is the same process that we will use each time we analyze a poem. I'm going to be posting it to Edsby in typed form, so you don't have to deal with my handwriting. But for now, here it is. And here's what we're going to do. The first time we read a poem, each time this week we go to read a poem, we're just going to read it. We're just going to let it wash over ourselves, get some of those first impressions, see what kind of sticks and catches the first time through, and just enjoy it if possible. The second time through, we're going to start looking for literal meaning. So what is literally going on? Is there an event being talked about? Is there a main image that's being examined or discussed or described, right? What is literally going on? The third time through, we're going to be looking for sound or other poetic elements. So those things that you made a big old vocabulary list for yesterday, we're going to look and see if we can find any of those things in the poem, all right? What sticks out? It is not as important that we find every single one of those elements because they're not all going to be used in every poem, right? It's more about, okay, what are the ones that seem to be active and like really sticking out in this poem, okay? The fourth time through, we're going to be thinking and rereading, and this is not like a full reading of the poem necessarily. This is just thinking first and letting that thinking drive the parts of the poem that we reread. And when we're doing those rereadings, we're looking for how those devices interact with the literal events. So where do number 3 and number 2 kind of come together? All right. And then our purpose in looking at those is trying to identify what is the message that's being shared. Poetry is hugely about theme. And so looking for what is it that the author is trying to communicate to us? What does this author see? What is this perspective that they've discovered and stumbled upon that they feel is so important to share with us? All right. So let's go ahead and start with step 1, our initial read through, just letting the poem wash over us. Here we go. Prayer to the Pacific by Leslie Marmon Silko. I traveled to the ocean distant, from my southwest land of sandrock to the moving blue water big as the myth of origin. Pale. Pale water in the yellow-white light of the sun floating west to China. Where ocean herself was born, clouds that blow across the sand are wet. Squat in the wet sand and speak to the ocean. I return to you, turquoise, the red coral you sent us, sister spirit of earth. 4 round stones in my pocket I carry back the ocean to suck and to taste. 30,000 years ago, Indians came riding across the ocean carried by giant sea turtles. Waves were high that day. Great sea turtles waded slowly out from the gray sundown sea. Grandfather turtle rolled in the sand 4 times and disappeared, swimming into the sun. And so, from that time immemorial, as the old people say, rain clouds drift from the west, gift from the ocean. Green leaves in the wind, wet earth on my feet, swallowing raindrops clear from China. So, initial reading, things that stick out. I'm hearing obviously a lot about the ocean, so I'm seeing a lot of images from the ocean, the turtles. She's got some contrasts there between youth and old age. The old age as noted in things like, as the old people say, immemorial grandfather turtle, and then the youth noted in choices like suck and to taste. We usually equate those types of actions with babies, so that makes some sense. Yeah, okay, there's a whole lot there. So that's first reading, couple first impressions. Now heading back, what's my second step? My second step is going to be to read it again. When I read it again, also, I'm not looking for anything super specific yet. I'm just trying to get an overall literal meaning. What is happening in this poem? All right, so here we go. Second reading. Prayer to the Pacific by Leslie Marmon Silko. I traveled to the ocean distant from my southwest land of sandrock to the moving blue water, big as the myth of origin. Pale, pale water in the yellow-white light of sun floating west to China. Where ocean herself was born. Clouds that blow across the sand are wet, squat in the wet and speak to the ocean. I return to you, turquoise and the red coral you sent us, sister spirit of earth. 4 round stones in my pocket I carry back the ocean to suck and to taste. 30,000 years ago, Indians came riding across the ocean, carried by giant sea turtles. Waves were high that day. Great sea turtles waded slowly out from the gray sundown sea. Grandfather turtle rolled in the sand 4 times and disappeared, swimming into the sun. And so from that time immemorial, as the old people say, rain clouds drift from the west, gift from the ocean. Green leaves in the wind, wet earth on my feet, swallowing raindrops clear from China. Okay, I definitely on this second read feel like I've got a better understanding of what's going on. So let's hop back here at the beginning and take a look. So she starts off by talking about, I traveled to the ocean distant, from my southwest land of Sandrock, to the moving blue water, big as the myth of origin. So literally, physically, what's happening here is she's traveling, right? So she travels to the ocean, and then what? We've got some description of the ocean, right? Pale, pale water in the yellow-white light of the sun floating west to China. Okay, there's a connection to China. I have a feeling that's going to be important, but I'm going to come back to that because I'm just getting the idea of what's going on. So she is standing on the Pacific shoreline, looking out toward the west, toward China. Pacific, guys, think California, right? That's Pacific. Okay, where Ocean herself was born. Okay, so here I feel like we have a shift. We're drifting into like myth and legend and stuff, right? Because if we're talking about where Ocean was born, okay, well, that's definitely something that's got to be coming from a myth. All the myths are about things like where crazy creatures were born, or how those creatures interact, or how like the elements of earth are actually these titans or whatever, right? It's all stuff like that. So this, we're stepping into her musing about or thinking about myth and legend and origins, where she comes from, where the world comes from, right? Then we jump back to literal for a second. Squat in the wet sand. Okay, so she's literally like squatting down next to the water and returning to you turquoise and red coral you sent us. So maybe she's putting some turquoise rocks or red coral rocks back in the water, right? She calls the water sister spirit of earth. Interesting. 4 round stones in my pocket I carry back the ocean to suck and to taste. Okay, so she's literally picking up 4 round stones while she's squatted down talking to the water. She also picks up these 4 round stones to take back with her. 30,000 years ago, and then we hop back into myth, right? We hop back into this idea of her ancestors who came riding across the ocean carried by giant sea turtles. That's like a myth in her culture. Okay, so quick literal statement, and I am going to write this in the My Notes section right next to the poem because I've got some space there. So this is what I would recommend you do. You should have some space in the My Notes section next to each poem. So literally what's happening, literally she has traveled to the ocean, Pacific, it's probably important, right? And is squatting by the water, talking to it, leaving and taking stones, and thinking about her ancestry and why the ocean's important. Sorry about my sideways whiting, guys. Writing ocean's important to her culture. And we can ascertain that she's Asian, right, based on all that. Okay, and the name, of course, Silko. All right, so, yeah, boom. So that's our literal interpretation, all right? So now I'm going to read the whole poem again a 3rd time. Now, I know, guys, this might seem kind of belabored. It might feel like, oh, my God, why do we have to read it again? Well, you do. When it comes to poems, remember we talked about the economy of words, right? They're using as few words as possible. And so sometimes that meaning is very hard packed in there because the words are super, it's like bleach concentrate, right? You've got normal bleach, which has some water in it, and so it's not as strong. But in a poem, everything's concentrated like concentrated bleach or a concentrated chemical. And so you kind of have to take the time to pick it apart, maybe water it down right before using it, so that it can make a little bit more sense, because there's so much meaning packed in that little space. All right, so here's our third read. This time we're looking for poetic elements. Quick review to remind ourselves what we're looking for. If you flip back to 299, you've got your list, or you might have yours on a piece of paper, that's fine. You've got your list of all the literary devices for poetry and a definition and at least one example, hopefully, at this point, all right? And as we read through poems, we're going to be collecting examples in this third column. So you'll get a few today. So I've got connotation, tone, imagery, diction, hyperbole, allusion, symbol, extended metaphor, anaphora, theme. And on the back, we've got refrain, onomatopoeia, alliteration, rhyme, assonance, and consonants. So these are all things that I can look for as I'm rereading this poem for a third time. All right, and you might find yourself needing to kind of glance back and forth through between these. You might, the first couple times you're analyzing poetry, honestly, you might need to think, okay, I'm just going to look for connotation, tone, and imagery. Okay, now I'm going to read it again and just look for diction, hyperbole, allusion. So you might, on this third step, end up reading this poem like another 4 or 5 times the first couple times you're doing this, just because it's hard to keep all of these things in mind, right? But again, we don't have to find everything. We just need to find the stuff that really sticks out. So don't stress too much, okay? So next we're going to go back to the poem and read it a third time. And this time I'm going to take my time because I know I'm looking for stuff, okay? I traveled to the ocean distant, from my southwest land of sandrock to the moving blue water, big as the myth of origin. Okay, got a key word here, as. Anytime I see as, I know that I'm dealing with simile. Well, not anytime, right? But most of the time if I see the word as or I see the word like, I'm dealing with a simile. So I'm going to underline that, and I'm going to mark that it's a simile because it stuck out to me. Pale. Pale water in the yellow-white light of sun floating west to China. See, this is really kind of bothering me because I feel like there's something with that word pale that's important. And it's not any necessarily any literary device. So if I'm dealing with a word and it's the choice of word that seems to be sticking out, even if it's not like a specific literary device, I can always look at the connotations of that word. All right, so I'm going to put connotation, and then I got to think about, oops, I'm writing over her name. Oh, well. And then I got to think about, too, well, what is the connotation? Why pale instead of something else? What does pale represent? Pale might represent old age. And there's a lot of that going on in here, right? Could represent death, because people who are dead have paler skin, right? They look clammy and stuff usually. Could represent decay. Oftentimes if things pale, they have decayed, all right? So those are some of the possible connotations. And I've got to look in context, right? So pale water in the yellow-white light of the sun floating west to China. Well, if the sun is floating west away from where she is, then yeah, decay, old age, death, sure. The sun's going away, everything's getting more pale. Yeah, that would make sense. It works with those things. All right, so flipping on. Where ocean herself was born. Okay, that's not literal, right? Because we all know that the ocean wasn't necessarily born anywhere, because the ocean is not a person, the ocean is a thing. So therefore, that is personifying the ocean, isn't it? Personification, boom. It is giving the ocean human qualities. Interesting. Okay, cool. Clouds that blow across the sand are wet. Not getting anything out of that. All right. Squat in the wet sand and speak to the ocean. I return to you, turquoise, the red coral you sent us, sister spirit of earth. So again, we've got the personification because she's calling the ocean sister. Return to you, turquoise. Okay, cool. We've got colors here, and I feel like those colors might be important at some point, but it's not a literary device specifically, so I'm going to move forward. 4 round stones in my pocket, I carry back the ocean. Okay, here we go. I carry back the ocean. She literally picking that ocean up and taking it with her? I don't think so. That's a metaphor. So we're going to label that metaphor. Hooray! Okay. 30,000 years ago, Indians came riding across the ocean, carried by giant sea turtles. Well, that's a lovely image. So I'm going to get that one for imagery. And then waves were high that day. Great sea turtles waded slowly out from the gray sundown sea. Oh, here's the sea being all gray and pale again. Interesting. Waves were high that day. Great sea turtles waded slowly out from the gray sundown sea. That's pretty literal. I don't see anything figurative in that one or any, I mean, you could go with imagery, but Grandfather Turtle rolled in the sand 4 times and disappeared, swimming into the sun. Okay, again, Grandfather Turtle. Turtle ain't no person. Come on now. So there's some personification there. He's not an inanimate object, so it's not a straight personification, but he is an animal, and it is giving him human qualities. So, yeah. Rolled in the sand 4 times and disappeared, swimming into the sun. Swimming into the sun, okay, not literally, right? So we're dealing with a metaphor. And so from that time, immemorial, as the old people say, rain clouds drift from the west, gift from the ocean. Okay, this is the legend, right? This is just interesting side note. This is not necessarily part of our hunt for those literary devices, but this indicates that the legend tells us that when Grandfather Turtle disappeared, rain began to come from the ocean. Like he left behind a gift that comes back to them every year, right, in the form of rain. All right. Green leaves in the wind, wet earth on my feet, swallowing raindrops clear from China. Okay, so again, lovely imagery there, very grounding imagery, but I'm not noticing any devices right now. Okay. So you might have found some different things. You might have caught some things that I missed. Nobody is perfect. And it really, when it comes to interpreting poetry, it is very much about what sticks out to you. And that's what's going to be important, right? So now I've got all these different things that I've noticed and brought up. Now what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to go back and think and reread, how do these devices interact with literal events? What message is being shared? So I'm going to start with that message idea and let that guide my thinking and rereading. Okay, so she's got all these crazy, not crazy, I'm sorry, they're not crazy at all. So if we had to think about what message is she sharing, there's definitely a lot in her poem about origin, about ancestry, and so I might ask myself, okay, what is she, because again, right, you can move into theme from subject, so start with subject. What is the poem all about? We're going to do this one over here in the My Notes section. And this is not in my list, my original list of what to do, but I think I'm probably going to be adding it. So if you're trying to look at theme, the first thing again that you want to look at is subject. Ask yourself, what is this all about? All right, and that's going to tell you what the subject is. So if I had to ask myself, what is this poem all about? That's going to tell me the subject. I'd say the poem is all about kind of questioning where you're from, learning from the legends of our ancestors, and appreciating those legends and being grateful for that ancestry. Oh, so if I had to put that into like 2 words or 3 words, I'd say appreciating. It's all about appreciating ancestry. I think that's a reasonable answer, okay? You might have something different. You might have noticed something different, and that's another wonderful thing about poetry. There are not wrong answers necessarily. There are good supported answers, and there are answers that maybe aren't as strong because they lack that support, or there's not enough in the poem to really demonstrate what you're trying to stretch it to mean, right? But if you're basing your interpretation in fact in what's there, and you've done these steps, you're going to be doing that, then you should be fine, and you won't have a bad answer. And there is no wrong answer, so boom. All right, so once I've discovered the subject, appreciating ancestry is what I'm going with, then I can think about theme. And theme is just taking it a step further to say, okay, well, what is the author trying to tell me about appreciating ancestry? Does she think that it's stupid? Does she think it's important? Does she think that it can be done through physical acts of like a journey to the sea? Like, right, what is she trying to tell me about appreciating ancestry? So, and this is going to come out really funky the first time because it always does for me, but so maybe she's trying to say something. I'm going to try to talk it through first and then I'll write it down. So maybe she's trying to say something to the effect of like, it is important to take the time to recognize and appreciate our ancestry. It is important to, because she does that thing of like taking the stones. So I wonder if that, you know, is kind of an indication of what she thinks it's important to do. Like not only to appreciate the ancestors, but then also to like take mementos and kind of build shrines and do some of these ritualistic type things that people do to appreciate their ancestors. So I'm going to keep it real simple, and I'm just going to say taking time to appreciate ancestry and culture. Maybe our stories. See, this is what always happens to me. I start writing the darn thing, and then I'm like, oh no, it'd be better if you worded it this way. To appreciate our stories is, it's not necessary. There's a weightier word than that, because I feel like for her it's almost, it's beyond necessary. It's something that almost happens by instinct because it's so important. But I'm not coming up with a better word right now, so I'm just going to go with the one that came to me so far, and I would probably want to come back and reword that later, is important. All right, so taking time to appreciate our stories. Maybe I would add the word personal or our ancestral stories. Oh, geez, I have too many carrots and arrows, whatever. All right. Ancestral. Okay, so that statement then now has become, and this is my theme statement, right? Taking time to appreciate our ancestral and personal stories is important. And that's my theme statement. And again, how did I get there? I got to theme by doing this, by reading the poem a whole bunch of times, by looking at what it means literally first, then second, by looking at the elements that she uses to get there, right? And just identifying those elements, that helps me discover the theme, right? Taking the time to kind of notice what sticks out, notice where she's used figurative language, where she's used metaphor, where she's used personification, imagery, because where she's using those things and what she's using them to do indicates the message that she's trying to give us, because that's what's important, right? So from there, I said, okay, what is that theme? What is that message being shared? Because that's our fourth step. To get to theme, I start with subject. I go back and I think just overall, whole poem, what's it about? It's about appreciating ancestry. Cool. Now I ask myself, what is the message, or how does the author feel about appreciating ancestry? Or what does she want us to think about appreciating ancestry? Because that's going to tell us theme, her message, right? So from there I came up with that the message is, the theme is, taking time to appreciate ancestral and personal stories is important. Boom. So now I've completed all 4 steps, and if someone were to come ask me questions about that poem, I'd probably be able to answer them pretty easily, right? For example, this question down here, how does this poem reflect the author's Native American culture? Well, hell yeah, I have noted a whole bunch of stuff about that. She talks about the turtles, she talks about the legends of the turtles, and hey, by the way, guys, little quick text to world connection, Moana, right? Absolutely, this girl is probably from one of the South Pacific Islands. Okay. But there are lots of things that I could say about that, where I could go back through this poem and I could find examples, and I could talk about, you know, where she notes grandfather turtle rolling over the sand 4 times and disappeared swimming into the sun. And so from that time immemorial, as old people say, rain clouds drift from the west. So this legend about how rain came about and why there's rain that comes in from the west all the time. You know, she includes this legend from her culture. I could talk about that, right? So if I've taken the time to do these 4 steps, I have set myself up to pretty much answer any question about that poem that I might be asked. Yep, that's about it. Again, office hours are from 1:30 to 2:30, so if you have any questions beyond this, I'm sorry this video is forever long, but hopefully it's a really, really helpful breakdown of how to kind of go into analyzing a poem. All right. Thanks, guys.